We will be beginning with track 5, titled Public-Private Partnerships for Inclusive Development, Role of the Corporate Sector. This track is going to be chaired by Ambassador Prakash Shah. Mr. Prakash Shah, the chairman of the Planning and Development Board of Symbiosis International University, was a permanent representative at the UNO. He was also a career diplomat with the Indian Foreign Services. He has served as India's ambassador to Japan and Venezuela, as India's High Commissioner to Malaysia and Brunei, and as India's permanent representative to the UNO offices in Geneva and New York. The eminent speakers that we have in our track are Shri Praful Patel, Honorable Minister of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises, Government of India; His Excellency Mr. Landing Savané, former Senior Minister, Republic of Senegal; Mr. Pankaj Khimji, Chairman, Oman India Business Council; Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, Chairman and Managing Director, Kirloskar Brothers; Mr. Arun Khanna, COO, Emcure Pharmaceuticals Limited; Mr. N. Subramaniam, Chief Risk Officer, Larsen & Toubro. We will be beginning the session shortly as soon as Ambassador Shah receives and brings forth to the stage Mr. Praful Patel. Thank you. This is just an announcement regarding the certificates. Authors are to collect their certificates from the SIRI, that's the Siri building, during the tea break. For track 6, certificates will be given by Dr. Sukalpa Chakravarti after the track has been completed. Also, this is a request for all participants and guests to visit the library to see the poster presentations by the other authors. Thank you. Since I've already briefed you about Ambassador Prakash Shah, I would now like to request him to please take the proceedings further. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and the distinguished speakers on the platform here. Our first speaker is going to be Shri Praful Patel, Honorable Minister of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises, who has very kindly consented to spend half a day here. In fact, we have a little apology for you that we came a little late because the helicopter landed a little late. But all is well now, and I don't need to introduce Mr. Patel because all of you know about him, except to add that from whatever I know of him, which is fairly long time, he is one of our most charismatic, attractive and easily available in terms of listening to the public, etc., ministers of the cabinet. He is also extremely knowledgeable both of the corporate sector, private corporate sector, as well as of the government. And as a Minister of Heavy Industries, of course, his responsibilities are largely in the public sector and in heavy industries outside the public sector. So before, without any, as our previous chairman said, without any further ado, let me just mention that when President Karzai spoke about India-Afghanistan relations, he also emphasized, as you remember, the public sector's role in Afghanistan, and in addition, the private sector's role, particularly in extractive and other industries. So we have no person better to speak about public-private participation and the role of the corporate sector in our capacity building with Asia and Africa than Shri Praful Patel. So may I invite him to come and speak on the subject of public-private participation and our capacity building roles in Asia and Africa.
Good afternoon, friends, and other distinguished panelists on the dais. I think it is indeed a very, I would say, a very interesting and a satisfying moment this afternoon to see a very, very different kind of conference which we normally address at universities. And I see many distinguished faces here, some old friends here this afternoon. And it is, I think, an important thing in our country that universities reach out and open out to the world and try to understand a perspective which we normally don't only get in the textbooks. And what better way than to have a international conference with many distinguished leaders, distinguished dignitaries, distinguished friends from the Foreign Service, friends from industry, business, the academics, all under one roof to try to give you a perspective and on different fields, different subjects. And I think this is something which would be truly very interesting for all of you. And I'm sure that we all here on dais will also try to give our little bit of a perspective to make the proceedings and this conference a little bit more interesting. Well, I think the subject chosen is about public-private partnerships, and of course the scope is, I don't think it is very much international, but I think the concept of public-private partnerships is very universal, and therefore I think, at least from the Indian perspective, it has a very, significant role now and in the years to come. Historically, of course, India, after independence, had a very, very strong public sector, and rightly so, because we had just come out of the independence struggle. There was very little, private capital in the country, very few people who had engaged in business and in big business. And you could count a handful of names like Tatas, Birlas and so on, who had some, past of having big businesses. But on the whole, Indian capital was scarce. Entrepreneurs were not having that world vision or the magnitude of the business which was ahead of them. And therefore, the government in its wisdom set up a strong public sector. And I think that is one of the very important, I think, in any nation's evolution and development. I think it is important that we, step up our development process. And I think the first step and a foundation, a strong foundation for India's economic and industrial development came from the public sector. And that is why today, and I say even today, after so many years, more than 66 years into independence, also the fact that we have now a very vibrant private sector in our country, but there has been a historical and even today a very important role which is played by the public sector in our country. And if you just look at the map of India, if you see the northeast, you see many parts of, say, Jharkhand, Orissa, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, you go to places in Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, remote parts. Even today, many of the industrial townships or the economic activity which is taking place there is on the back of the strong public sector involvement and the kind of big industries and the big investments they have made in those areas, which has led to a strong foundation. And today, I must say that even in the private sector, while the role has grown dramatically, there is a compelling case to have a strong public sector competing in a vibrant economic atmosphere with the private sector. And this evolution, and as I said, every country's, nation's history has its stepping up program. And India is not a very, very old country in terms of age. We must acknowledge sometimes we are very restless and we say and we criticize a lot of things, rightly so at times, but also to be understood in the perspective that India has not been a very old country in terms of age, and therefore if you look at the overall process, it has been a step up from purely public sector to a very controlled private sector. We used to have the days of the industrial Raj and the licensing Raj, as we used to call it, and nobody would be able to produce more than what they could, given by the license terms, and so on. But those days are now history, and because I remember while I'm in Pune, I don't mind acknowledging that the Bajaj scooter used to be like, a dowry. When the child is born, you used to book a Bajaj scooter so that when the child grows up, the booking will have materialized, and that could be the dowry gift, or it could be the college, passing out gift to a child, or a telephone, which used to be today, all of you who study in institutions like Symbiosis do not know that 20 years ago, you had to even book a trunk call from here to Mumbai, and probably 9 out of 10 times the operator will call back and say, sorry, the line is busy or the lines are down. Then you will book an urgent call, then you will make a lightning call, finally you will manage a 1-minute conversation on a broken line. But those days are history, and in 20 years, it's not a very long passage of time. You see, we forget very easily. But in 20 years from that generation which probably, was yearning for communication, you are today communicating on par with the rest of the world. At the click of a button here in front of me, I can see a surgery being conducted in Boston, or I could see, a lecture being given at Harvard or, any other major institution. And so knowledge and the barriers and I think the boundaries have come completely, I would say blurred now, and in fact we are living in a very, very universal concept, and that's why I think these kind of conferences, especially when you bring people from, our friend is here from Senior Minister from Senegal, and I meet our friend the Minister from Iraq, the Member of Parliament from Iraq, I see the Ambassador of Rwanda, and so on. I mean, we had President Karzai this morning. So this is something truly which is needed to be understood in an ever-changing world where boundaries have been blurred, and all of us live in a world where just now our friend from Iraq, how many people would think that, without, actually going through the textbooks, that how much of trade you have between India and Iraq? I mean, being in government also, of course, I would know a little bit more, but I still would not have the exact figure. You have 20 billion trade between India and Iraq, where they sell us 20 billion worth of oil, whereas our reverse trade with them is under $1 billion. So it is something, see, it's how different it is. You don't look at Iraq. Everybody will, sitting in India, will say, wow, what is happening in the United States, what's happening in China, what is happening in Britain or Germany. But we'll forget that, we don't do that much of trade with many of these countries. While we engage with them on a very different level, we do not actually engage with many a country considering the opportunities which exist. And therefore, I think we need to understand, we need to bridge these gaps, and that's why, coming back to the public-private partnership issue also, that we need to build a very vibrant private sector competing with the public sector, and where both can coexist. In fact, the other day, I was, discussing with our Ministry of Public Enterprises, which deals with all the public sector. I put a random thought. Here we have some friends, L&T, Kirloskar, who run big businesses. You see the historical value or the market value of these companies, it will be very, very high. No issues. They've done a great job. A parallel company of the same scale in the public sector will be valued at minus 50%. Not for any other reason. Probably the strengths are more. Probably the intrinsic value may be more, the asset base may be more, but unfortunately, because it is public sector, it will not be perceived in the same way as a private sector company. So I was just thinking that, if we put all the public sector under one holding company, like a Temasek of Singapore or some, equivalent model of the UAE Investment Authority or some kind of, holding structure, what would be the value of our public sector? Because all our public sector is not listed. But if the ownership, which vests in the government anyway, a bulk of it, or whatever the percentage of ownership which vests in the government could be transferred into the holding company, what would be the value of that company? And I can assure you that it will find a place in the top 10 of the 500 fortune companies of the world. So these are things which have to be understood. And also the fact that our private sector has grown exponentially. I was talking about communication. Communication in our country, as I was giving you all the examples, today has actually redefined Indian industry, Indian business, and the way the world looks at India forever. And I think a lot of the strong showing which we see in India in terms of the financials of companies, the perception of companies, the confidence of companies and the recognition of companies from India outside is also, a lot of it has been initially kick-started by the revolution which came in the telecom and the IT sector, which brought a renewed respect and I think the assurance to the world that Indian companies can do business as good or better than their counterparts anywhere in the world. And therefore, if you see sector after sector, today, whether it is, automobiles, today you will be surprised. Pune is the home of the automobile virtually in India. A large part of it comes from this region. Pune, or the automobile industry in India, we used to make probably a few 100,000 cars until not more than 10-12 years ago. Today, this year, we are making 3.2 million vehicles, four-wheelers, 14 million two-wheelers, and we are going to make 1 million heavy vehicles in our country. This accounts for 25% of the manufacturing GDP of the country. This accounts for almost an equivalent tax collections of the country. And I dare say, in India, with the kind of upward mobility, the kind of disposable incomes, the growing middle class, there is absolutely a case to see India by the time 2020 or 2025, we will be making 10 million automobiles a year, we will be making 30 million two-wheelers a year, we will be making more than 3 million heavy vehicles a year. Can you imagine the kind of investment that will bring, the kind of employment opportunities it will bring, the kind of revenues it will bring in? And all this cannot be done by the government alone. Now, in a classic example of the automobile sector, the government was hardly involved in it, and now the government is not at all involved in it. Today, all automobile companies from across the globe have set up shop in India. Not a single, I would say, major manufacturer of automobiles is left out in this country. And that's the good sign. This is where the private sector comes in. This is where the role of an expanding economy, opening up not only for India but for the world, where automobile industry is not only driven by the private sector from India, but it is being driven by many a company which is not based in India. And that is the expanding role which we seek in our country. We want investment. Ultimately, while we are in public life, everybody talks of roti kapda makan. Everybody talks of other things. I'm not going into the other aspects which are currently being debated in the country, but strictly in the sense of giving back to what the people need in the country. How can we achieve it without economic development in our country? Is there some other model anybody has? I don't think so. And if anybody has, we are more than welcome to listen to it. In Senegal or in Iraq, if you have to give something back to the people, if you want to provide them with all the basic necessities of life, I don't think your or our government can do anything better until and unless we generate that kind of economic activity and that kind of revenue for the government. Without that, there is no writing a free check anymore. Nobody writes a free check for India. Nobody is going to write a free check for Iraq or for any country for that matter. And that's why each country will have to recognize that it has to be strong economically from within. There used to be a time, I used to be the Minister of Civil Aviation earlier. There used to be a time where used to be only having an Air India which used to be flying in the Indian skies. You used to have a controlled regime where the money is provided by the government. They work whichever their economics, whether they earn, lose, whatever, that cost is passed on to the consumer. Today, I don't think you can pass on a cost to the consumer because with the kind of choice which you have in the country, in the era of open competition, you are going to be able to get what you will have to give what the consumer wants, not what you want. And even in the area of public-private partnership, we used to have all the airports controlled by the Airports Authority of India. Today, we have world-class airports built within a span of 5 years where you have private sector, and now because of the competition generated by the private sector, the public sector, the airport authorities, airports itself now have been upgraded to far better standards because this is the area where competition brings out the best of both. The private sector set in motion the process, and the public sector also understood that we can't be left behind, and therefore this is where the whole area and the whole process gets kick-started. So it is important to have a strong public sector, but it is also equally important to bring in competition by the private sector, more investments by the private sector, and private sector need not necessarily be, as I said, from within the country. It could be private sector bringing in capital from wherever. And today it is so heartening to see. There was a time where we could not imagine that any company in India will even have $1 billion of turnover. 20 years back, I don't think any Indian company had even 1 billion in turnover revenues. Today, there are so many companies which earn billion and billions of dollars in terms of profits. So that is the changing profile of Indian business, even the private sector. Today, Tatas can go and buy a Jaguar Land Rover. Today, a ArcelorMittal is born. Today, a Birla company goes and buys Novelis outside of India. These were never even imaginable in the past. We used to always think a foreign company will always come to the rescue of an Indian company. Today it is the reverse, where an Indian company goes outside of India and actually goes and redefines the way business can be conducted. So there are changing times, changing possibilities, and I think we all must acknowledge that. And we, whether it's in government or outside of government, we must understand that we need to work together, we need to work in strong partnership, and now it is equally important that we work with strong partnerships with international community, whether it be the governments of of other countries, or whether it be companies from other places. We have to work in an era where we build up a strong economy. As I said earlier, there is no other solution for the well-being of our countrymen or for the world unless and until it is partnered or backed by strong economics. And that's where I think the world will have to come closer together, whether it's the public sector, private sector, or the world community. That is the way forward. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. You have had we have had the benefit of a brief but very elucidating lecture by Mr. Patel on public-private partnership, not only in India, but the examples he gave in India are so valid for other countries at similar stages of development in Africa and in Asia. And it is heartening to know that all our resources, both in the private and the public sector, are being utilized in order to provide for whatever cooperation and aid that we give to the Asian countries and African countries who are our friend. Our next speaker is Mr. Landing Savané. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, former senior minister of the Republic of Senegal, who has a great deal of experience. He's a politician, currently holds the position of Secretary General of the African Party for Democracy and Socialism, has been Minister of Arts and Crafts and a senior minister in Senegal. And may I invite you, sir, to give the benefit of your thoughts.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chancellor, Dr. Mujumdar, I first want to thank you for inviting me at this extraordinary conference on international relations. I have not been in Asia during the last 7 years. Before that, I visited a few countries, including China, India, Pakistan, Philippines, Thailand, and others. And I was just thinking about the relations between India and Senegal for personal research, from my personal research, and I got this invitation to come here. I didn't hesitate a minute, and I decided to come. And I will tell you that I'm happy that I'm here. Mr. Majumdar, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Minister, I'm happy to be here not to speak about Senegal, but to speak about India and Africa. Senegal is a small country, less than 15 million people, smaller than Mumbai. So it doesn't deserve that much interest from that point of view. Speaking about Africa is my natural commitment, and it's my duty to give you some views about the relations between India and Africa. Pardon me if my English is not that good sometimes, because I'm from a French-speaking country, but I'm pleased to speak with you and give you my remarks. But you know, sometimes we in Africa, we say that this is destiny. Why is it destiny? Because I could never think or expect 2 months ago that I will be in India today. And it is very important because today Nelson Mandela is being buried in his home village. And you know how Nelson Mandela is important to all of us. We had a minute of silence for him yesterday. But not only that he is important for us in Africa, he is as important for you in India. That makes the event very emotional to me. South Africa is a country where you have a lot of Indians. Mahatma Gandhi used to live in South Africa before joining India and working along the principles of nonviolence. And he could lead India to freedom through the principle of nonviolence. Nelson Mandela also finally understood the importance of nonviolence and could lead his country to independence and the end of apartheid with the principle of nonviolence. Which means that we are meeting here during this weekend, and it could be an opportunity for all of us to think about those events. I will say that Mandela is the best product of individual cooperation between India and Africa, because he understood the principles on which Gandhi built his struggle, and he was able to put them in action and reach the magnificent results he have achieved in South Africa. So please, ladies and gentlemen, I would like all of us to give a standing ovation to Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. For 1 minute, we can get up and give them a standing ovation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I had to say a few words on this because it's not the past. Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela are for me the future of the relations. They show us the direction we should take to build solid relations between India and Africa. I met your Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when he was the Secretary General of South-South Commission. And in 2011, he was at a meeting in Addis Ababa on the relations between India and Africa. And he made there a very important statement to me, which is that Africa will be the future force for development in the world in the next decades. And he decided there to make $5 billion US available for loans for African countries. Unfortunately, yesterday I happened to know that the amount has not been that much used. But it was good to know it, because it means that the intentions are there, but we are not achieving a lot. And even here, through the discussions, what I can understand is that we have not done a lot in the cooperation between Africa and India. It doesn't mean that Indians are not aware of the need to do it. We can see that the government is trying. In Africa, you have now every year a meeting between Africa and India to discuss those issues. But we need something more. What else can we do to push those relations between India and Africa? I think that, and it appeared during some sessions, that Indians are not very much aware of the importance of Africa for them. Africans also, the opinion, we know India, we like Indian music, Indian movie. When I was very young, during the colonial period, I used to go to the movie and see Indian movie, Albella, Fille des Indes, was the title in French. We did appreciate at the time. But here we are talking about very serious issues, about development, about the betterment of the conditions of human beings. And today, for various reasons, I am by profession a statistician and a demographer. And I have been working on demographic trends. And you can see that for the year 2050, India and Africa will be the more important regions of the world by their population and by the importance, the proportion of the youth in their population. And the more young people you have, sometimes it's a matter of hope for the future. If the youth is properly educated, properly cured, properly employed, and is able, so you are right to say that we have first to invest in the population and clearly to invest in the youth. That's why we have to congratulate you, Chancellor Mujumdar, for the thing you have done in India, and hope that you will not stay in India. Why? Why don't you try, as you tried here with foreign students, Why don't you try to go overseas and see what can be done to strengthen your action in a region like Africa, who needs it a lot? I will suggest that we create a kind of Indian-African think tank. We should call it maybe African-Indian corporate consortium for development or something like that, which can help the Indian government to identify much better the problems and the needs of Africans and to get involved, because the governments by themselves can never. That's my personal experience. I have been involved in politics for many years, and I know that governments by themselves cannot identify problems properly and deliver the better solutions. But if they have independent think tanks who can think about issues and give them proposals, then things will be better and will go faster. And that's what we need. Again, time is short. I don't want to take too much of your time. I just want to say again that Africa and India should work hand in hand. And that the day they achieve that goal, a better future is there for both the regions, the two regions of the world. Africa will benefit more, obviously, because the weaker always benefits more from a cooperation. But India will then be able to become, after China, because China took the lead these last decades, because China were involved in Africa much earlier and more deeply than India. But if India becomes aware and takes its share of responsibility in Africa, then you will see a great change, not only economic change, but cultural change, and a lot of changes in China who will be for the best, in India who will be for the best of the Indian people and of the African people. I'm sorry, the time is short. I don't want to abuse of your time, but I wanted to raise those issues. I will just say a few words about Senegal, which is that we have there at least 3 important Indian projects. One is IFCO. It is a project, an industry, phosphate, we transform and we export the production mainly to India. We have, since the early 2000, construction vehicle Tata projects there, joint venture is a Senegalese partner, and Mittal was supposed to come to exploit the iron ore in Senegal. Unfortunately, the situation of the market made them delay the project. So these are the 3 main things. And the government also helped for the development of agriculture in Senegal. And India has become the second commercial partner of Senegal since 2003. And between 2003 and 2011, the volume of exchanges have been multiplied by 4, which means that there is a potential in Africa and in Senegal in particular for the development of relations between India and Africa. And I think that you need that because you still have to face a lot of problems, and I'm sure that working with Africa will be something very important for you. And I hope that we like these meetings on Asia, India, Asia, and Africa, but you should see if it is possible also to have a more focused meeting on the relations between India and Africa, but an independent meeting, not governments, because governments are there, they do their share of the work. Okay, we pray for them, but we have to discuss issues more seriously and see what we can really, what we should suggest to the governments in all fields. And the cooperation between Africa and India should not be only about minerals and so on. In the cultural field, we have a lot to do. In the field of sports, in the field of education, health, and so on, there is a lot to do. And I think that only an independent institution can really go throughout all these things and make the proper recommendation. Thank you, all of you. I have finished with this statement, and I'm happy again to have been here, and I hope that we'll have other opportunities to discuss these very, very, very important issues.
I would like to thank the minister, senior minister from Senegal, for his views on India and Africa, and I can assure him that his English was so good that we understood everything that he told us about his thoughts and views. May I now change the tack a little bit and invite Mr. Pankaj Khimji, who is from Oman, but from a distinguished family which settled there over 100 years ago, and he would give us his views on hopefully the role of corporate sector or inclusive growth in terms of what India can do in Africa and Asia. Mr. Pankaj Khimji.
Good afternoon, Dr. Mazumdar, Dr. Vidya, Dr. Gupte, Prakash, Mr. Patel. It's not the first time that I'm here at Symbiosis. I seem to have some sort of a platonic relationship, not just with the family of Dr. Mazumdar, but also with this institution. I'm from Oman. My family hails from India, but that's 140 years ago. I'm the fifth generation Indian of Indian origin who's now having a business tie in Oman and have settled in Oman. As we speak, Oman is a relatively young country of not more than 43 years. When I say that, I mean that it's always been around. It's got a great heritage of 1,500 years and 1,300 years. It has had relations with India for over 2,000, 3,000 years, cultural, diplomatic relations of a few hundred years. So we're very fortunate that we have been neighbors only distanced by the Arabian Sea. If you take Gujarat as a state, and if you close your eyes and go due west, you hit a landmass called Oman. Oman is slightly larger than Maharashtra, but has only less than 4 million people, 3.75 to be precise, of which 1 million are expatriates. So the local ethnic population is no more than 2.5 million. But you have a landmass of 350,000 square kilometers. However, I'm here to talk about Arabia, not just Oman. But it's important that you understand what Oman means and what's happening in Oman, the transformation that is taking in Oman, and how that also should only mean that Arabia is only 10 times that. Because as a GDP, Oman has a GDP of approximately $50 billion, but Arabia is 10 times that. Or the GCC is 10 times that. The Arab-speaking world, or the Arab League, which Oman is part of, is 275 million people. And there's a free trade agreement between the Arab world, the Arab-speaking world, that is the Arab League. So in order to take advantage of this population, of a very high net worth population and country, you need to look at not just Oman, but look at the Arab League, which includes Iraq, it includes North Africa, includes the whole Arabian Peninsula. Oman is a gateway to the Arab world. Oman has been that for many years, and if you look at budgets in Oman and what has happened over the last 3 years, our revenue has grown twice, our expenditure has grown twice, our investments are more than 70%, more than 50%, and our total expenditure is about 80% more than what we were 5 years ago, or 3 years ago. So there's some huge transformation happening. And what is driving this transformation? 80 to 85% of the revenue of the GCC is hydrocarbon-based, oil and gas. You know what has happened to oil. You know how much you're paying for the liter of fuel in Oman, in India. That revenue is coming straight back to us. What do we do with this revenue? The total GCC has a population of no more than 35 to 40 million people. Only. That's twice the size of Mumbai, and having a GDP, huge proportions, nearly $500 billion. Where does the GDP going? The incomes are coming from oil, from gas, but if you see by 2020, we want services and industry to contribute in excess of 60%. Currently, 80% or 70% of GDP is coming from oil and gas. So we need to transform. We need to build industry. We need to build services. And who's going to help us do that? We do not have the technical ability. We do not have the strength or the physical human resources to put this in place. We need India to help. It's not that India hasn't been helping, but there's still room for more. Oman is growing at 13%. For the next 5 years, we have predicted a 6% growth, but we believe it will grow at about 7 to 8%. The 8th five-year plan will grow at 7.5%, which ends at 2015. Expenditure is going to be huge. $110 billion for a small country of only 4 million people, Oman. Budget allocation, the number one priority, employment generation. But how do I generate employment if there is no industry, if there are no services? So we need to build industry. How do we employ people if we technically skill them? Education is the biggest challenge that Oman faces. We have 50,000 school graduates every year. So multiply that by 10, 500,000 school graduates out of the GCC. But there are only 200,000 college spaces available. So where do they go? The government of Oman, out of 50,000, gives out 27,000 undergraduate scholarships every year for children to go and study. But there are only 10,000 seats available in Oman. So 15,000 scholarships are given for students to go and study abroad. There is an opportunity to put up public-private partnership with government to put up institutions either there or work with them to either bring them here to India to study. Training and skill development. We do not have industrial workers. We do not have shop floor workers. If we have, they're marginal in numbers. Today, 90% of the construction is done by expatriate workers from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. In every one of the GCC countries, there's an opportunity there. That's the public-private partnership that we're talking about. I'm glad that I have L&T on my table sharing with me, and they have played a phenomenal role. In the last 7 years, L&T has grown from a zero performance in Oman to an order book of close to $1 billion in Oman alone. They put up 3 major industries. They are doing construction of infrastructure, that is roads and bridges and buildings. They put up an offshore platform manufacturing center and a heavy industry fabrication center. Do you know that their offshore platforms in the Bombay High are manufactured in Oman by L&T and then sailed across to India? This can be done. So if you have a will, it will happen. New and ongoing infrastructure projects in Oman. We've got, at this moment in time, $5 billion in infrastructure development projects alone, in Oman alone. Multiply that by 10, $50 billion, probably close to $80 to $100 billion in the GCC alone, ongoing, only on infrastructure projects. That's roads. Health sector, huge gap demand. Oman will be building a Medicity, and they want specialty hospitals to come in and set up. They've allowed private hospitals to take place. Most of the Indian private sector, Apollo Group, Escorts, etc., they're all looking at Oman to set up. And that's where the government is saying, we are ready to pay $1 for dollar for every investment you make. You won't get it better anywhere else. Housing, welfare. We need to house our impoverished people. And the government is ready to pay for it. But who's going to build them? We need construction companies. We have the L&Ts of the world. We need to work more. What's the planned development expenditure going forward? $78 billion in Oman means another close to probably $1 trillion in the next 5 years going forward in the GCC. Huge amount. We're building airports, 5 airports, 3 ports. A railway of 2,700 kilometers needs to be built in Oman. But hold on a minute. That railway is not just about Oman Railway. Why are we building a railway? The GCC is building a railway connecting Jeddah, Riyadh, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Muscat, Salalah. Why? For every time a ship sails from China past Sri Lanka and up into the Arabian Peninsula, it has to go through the Strait of Hormuz and into the Gulf. When it does that, just as it passes Mumbai and goes up the Gulf, delivers all its products and comes out, it takes them 4 days. That's $100,000 of fuel per super tanker or per super Panamax vessel. That's $400,000 to $500,000 per voyage. A voyage every week. If you put up a railway and connect and drop the containers just on the coast of Oman, they save 4 days of sailing time. At 1/3 or less the cost, the same container reaches in 1/3 the time that it would have taken for the ship to move to Jeddah and as far off as Kuwait. This is going to be realized in the next 5 years. Who's going to build the railway? Who's going to help build the railway? We need companies from all over the world to help us do that. And again, I'm not talking about Oman. We're talking about a railway infrastructure across the Middle East, the GCC. It will eventually connect, hopefully, to Iraq. It will eventually connect to Yemen. But at this moment in time, just these 9 cities will be connected. It's a transformation. Have you heard about the railway story in America, when they connected the railway from east to west and how it transformed America? Well, I believe this is the transformation that is coming through. Well, gentlemen, I don't want to talk. This is the map in which the railway is going to happen. Connect across from Mecca, Medina, Riyadh, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait. And this is going to be the transformation. So ports, railways, airports, communication. Do you know who's ordering the highest number of planes in the world today? And who's going to operate all this? We need India to help us build, operate, maintain, and even own to an extent. In Oman, we have an acute shortage of essential commodities, food. You have an acute shortage of essential energy, fuel. Can we barter? Health. We do not have enough doctors. We do not have enough hospitals. You have more than thousands and thousands of doctors. We need your doctors. Logistics, trucking, warehousing. India is not that great in it, but however, when they go abroad, they get better at what they do there than when they do it over here in India. Tourism. Fantastic opportunities in tourism in UAE, in Oman, and it needs to be explored. Oman is the most India-centric country that India would ever find in the Arabian Peninsula. Please make use of it. Don't disregard us. And finally, education and skill development. Professor Mazumdar, Dr. Vidya, welcome to Oman. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. We have just had a very clear picture, not just of the opportunities in Oman, but in the GCC countries, which are much beyond Oman. But we thank Mr. Kimji for taking us around all the way from Oman into the Arabian Peninsula and its opportunities. Our next speaker is Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, Chairman and Managing Director of Kirloskar Brothers Limited. As you heard yesterday from some of our African colleagues, many countries in Africa, when they say pumps, they don't say pumps, they say Kirloskar. And I think that is enough introduction for me to invite Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar to give us the benefit of his views on India and Africa, capacity building and the role of private sector.
Thank you, Ambassador Shah. Excellencies, distinguished panel members, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's a matter of great honor for me to be here again on this stage. I think I was here a few months ago along with Dr. Mazumdar. Pardon? I'm fine now. Last time also I spoke a little bit about India and Africa. And this time also I've been asked to speak about public-private partnerships for inclusive development, role of the corporate sector with emphasis on my company's journey. So if it sounds more like an advertisement, please don't blame me. I've been asked to do that. But many years ago, 1888 was when Kirloskar Brothers was founded by my great-grandfather and his brother. And at that time, India was under British domination, like so many other countries in Africa and in Asia. And whatever were the problems, those were similar across both the continents. Both the brothers, all they wanted to do was make agricultural implements for farmers. And today, we're making pumps, which not only are used in agriculture, but also in thermal and nuclear power plants, in industrial factories, in buildings, all over the place. But like I said, businesses from many parts of Africa and Asia face similar challenges. And we were lucky because, as was brought out by the senior minister, Mahatma Gandhi was an inspiration to not only many people in Asia, but also in Africa. And that ensured that the relationship between India was quite a special country for many African countries who got independence after us. So we've had a wonderful welcome in Africa and in other parts of Asia as an Indian company. While driving inclusive growth, I believe the role of governments is first providing for the basic needs of citizens, and second, on creating employment opportunities for them, because everything else follows. Over the last 60 years or 63 years, or 66 years, I think many Indian companies have grown significantly, as Minister Praful Patel mentioned, both in public sector and in private sector, meeting the challenges of a developing nation. And I think the experiences of different Indian companies would be very beneficial across the world in many developing countries. I'm aware that companies like L&T, Tata's, all of them are also working in developed countries. The success of Jaguar Land Rover under Tata management also shows that Indian management is second to none. Very often when I go to Africa, a lot of people say, aren't India and China competing? I think probably China is competing with Europe and America in the race for resources over there. The Indian model is very different. What we hear across Africa is when the president or the prime minister of China visits quite a few African countries every year with checkbooks in hand, they sign up for a lot of projects which are then executed by Chinese companies with Chinese labor, Chinese materials. The Chinese labor moves back to China after the job is done. But there's very little African participation in the projects that China puts up. On the other hand, the Indian model is different. Senior Minister mentioned about $5 billion worth of line of credit that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh announced for Africa. And what India has said to the Indian companies, both private and public sector, is that if Africa wants a project and you are able to support it, then let the African country make that proposal. And then there is competition amongst Indian companies to put up that project. I have a few figures on the graph and on the slide behind, and you can see that whether it's trade or whether it's investment, it's a little lopsided, with China probably 3 times as far as we have reached. Since we were founded in 1888, we are a 125-year-old company now. And we started exporting our products, funnily enough, to Africa in the 1930s through a Dutch company. Kirloskar pumps have been in operation in Africa for over 50 years. The map shows some large pumping stations that we've put up along the Nile in Egypt. In fact, my grandfather, Mr. S.L. Kirloskar, when he started Kirloskar Oil Engines in Pune, very soon he was exporting, he wanted to export diesel engines, and that too to Germany. And 3 times in those days you not only needed an import license, you also needed an export license. And 3 times his application for an export license was met by import license papers, because no one could believe in Delhi that an Indian company wanted to export engineering goods. So over the 50s and across the 50s and the 60s, we exported a large number of diesel pump sets into Egypt. Like Ambassador Shah mentioned, that's why a pump is called Kirloskar in Egypt. Like in India in the 60s and the 70s, in the name of self-reliance, duties were raised, import tariffs were raised. And so what we did was we moved to larger pumps, and what you see is this map with locations of where we have our pumps. And we have our pumps in Egypt. In Africa, we work with what we call AAA technologies. That's appropriate, adaptable, and affordable. The history of our experience in Laos is very interesting, because in 1983, Mrs. Indira Gandhi gave the government of Laos a gift of 10 Kirloskar pump sets. What we didn't know at that time was these pump sets sat in the same constituency of the then Prime Minister on different farms, and they were evaluating what was going on, what make to buy. And all I can say is they found our pumps very good compared to the others, and over the next, from 96 to 97, 98, the government of Laos spent something like $38 million. In 1 year, we consumed 6% of their annual budget, the government's budget, and we delivered them pumps for irrigating their fields. We had something like 6 or 7 people who went to Laos, studied the requirements, came back and gave them a solution. Before the pumps went, we realized that if we wanted to maintain our reputation, we needed to upgrade the skills of people over there. And this is where maybe public-private partnership comes in, where with the government of Laos, we trained something like 300 technicians across the country. It's another small country with only 5 million people, so 300 people were a large number. We also brought about 80 people to India to train in our facilities. And I would think that our motives were quite selfish, in the sense that we wanted to ensure that our pumps would run on and on and on. They run even today. And what has happened is Laos, from being a rice importing nation, has become a rice surplus nation, exporting rice to Thailand and Vietnam. The popularity of our pump sets, thanks to the fact that they work 24/7, aided by local mechanics, has resulted in orders from Thailand, from Cambodia, from Vietnam. The rice production has also gone up significantly. About a decade ago, our company launched what we called our Focus Africa program with country-specific strategies, and the countries in green are the ones where we are present. The initiative was on promoting food and water sufficiency through customized solutions, because every country is different. You know, when the UN announced its Millennium Development Goals, and there were 5 of them, which is clean water, food, education, healthcare, and energy, we realized that through our companies we really address 3 of them, which is energy through our gensets, food and water through our pumps. And therefore that ensured that we could work very well in these areas. The government of India's line of credit policy also supported us. Here I would like to there's flags of different countries. We work with these countries, and these are all in the Caribbean or in Africa or in Asia. I'd like to explain what we did in Senegal. Senior Minister mentioned that the government was involved with the irrigation project, and that was with us. Maybe you're not aware, but I had the opportunity of meeting ex-President Wade a few times, and President Macky Sall is the one who signed the original contract. But the work that we did was done with $27 million line of credit given by the Government of India. In short, the land under irrigation went up from 20,000 hectares to 80,000 hectares. The dry season rice production went up from 60,000 tons to close to 800,000 tons. And we promised President Wade that if we completed the program, there's still another $20 million left. If we can move the line of credit, Senegal would not need to import any rice anymore. Our British subsidiary, again, Minister Patel mentioned about Indian companies buying companies abroad, has established a service station in Egypt. Egypt needs a large number of pumps, and not only ours, but a lot of our competitors' pumps are also there. And we felt that this would be the best way of serving that country. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Irrigation to train their people to ensure that their skills are upgraded and they can work with almost anyone's equipment. Sorry, this is two power stations that we work with. So currently, we are operating in many countries around the world, which are mentioned below. There are many things that can be done with public sector, with private sector. Together, I think countries can go forth and work together and get developed in a much better manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kirloskar, particularly for sharing with us your experiences in regard to working in Africa and Asia, and in particular in regard to the public-private partnership for what we call inclusive growth in these countries, and with the cooperation of the countries in which you have been working. We have now a slightly different subject, but that subject is very important because pharmaceuticals are one of the very prominent part of our export strategies in countries in Asia and Africa. So we have Mr. Arun Kumar Khanna, Chief Operating Officer, MCure Pharmaceuticals, to give the benefit of his views.
Good afternoon. Honorable Minister, other panelists, and people in audience. In fact, when Honorable Minister from Senegal talked about Africa, I thought I must speak something about Africa because I'm connected to Africa from early 90s. And I am one of the adopted son of a great African leader, Kenneth Konda. He calls me his Indian son, and I've been working with an HIV/AIDS initiative in Africa from 93 onwards. He was the first president to declare, while on chair, that his son died of AIDS. And with that spirit, I started working with him. And I have traveled to almost 20 countries with him on AIDS initiative. We are talking about Africa. In Africa, China, India, different model of engagement. But from my point of view, since I've been traveling to Africa for so many years, I feel China investment and India investment are symbiotic to each other. They're not challenging each other. China is investing in infrastructure, but India is building capability and capacity there. India has spent huge amount on developing talent in Africa. We have worked in healthcare in a very big way. Today, Africans' population suffering from HIV/AIDS has come down thanks to India, because India brought down the price of antiretroviral drugs from $20,000 per year to $40 per year cost. That was because of India. And that's how most funding agencies are able to provide healthcare to Africans. Then India has also spent there on education, e-gate learning. Today 53 countries have e-gate learning from India. Now in telecom also we are investing there. We are not so big in infrastructure, but when you look at, Sanjay gave a figure, $150 billion spent by China, India has spent 50 billion, but we have to find another fact or hidden fact behind. The third generation Indians are also contributing in that continent, and they are also building capacity and capability in Africa. Africa is youngest continent in the world. 10 African nations have, though I have not prepared this talk here because this came up, I was talking on a PPP. So 10 African nations are youngest in the world, where average population is below, 50% population is below 14 years. That means what? In Africa we need healthcare, education, food, sanitation, and grooming these kids. Now, with India's initiative on education health, I think we are ahead of China in this, to groom these kids in Africa. I feel Africa would be emerging economy for next 3 decades because of youngest nation. When you compare internet users in Africa, Africa has 85, Sub-Saharan Africa. When I talk of Africa, I'm talking about Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not talking about North Africa, which is like Europe. There are 80 million population, 85 million population uses internet, wherein China is only 80 million. Mobile users are more than 500 million there. GDP growth is 7%. Trading growth is 12%. And healthcare spend is almost 7% of the GDP. And funding agencies also funding another 4% in Africa. That means 11% of total GDP is on healthcare. Though Abuja Declaration 2002, the ministers, they declared that we'll spend 15% of the total budget on health. Many countries have gone beyond that. South Africa spends 8% of the GDP, not the budget of the country. Ghana has started spending 17%, Botswana spends 15%, and Minister, your country, spends only 6 to 7% on the health. PNA is acquiring my products. I'm supplying to PNA, my antiretrovirals in the country, and also doing technology transfer of manufactured products in Senegal through WAF, a company, local company. So that's about Africa. Now, my subject is, of course, PPP. Great. I experienced real PPP model outside when I entered here. That was Pune police parking. 45 minutes for one president's going out from here. Karji's motorcade was to pass. Then I had a good time with Sanjay Kirloskar talking something other issues. But that was my first PP, Pune police parking experience. Now my experience in PPP is in pharma industry. I'll talk to you. When we talk about a PPP, we are talking about the government, local company, non-profit organization, technology partners, or service providers. Of course, you all know what it means. The government services or private business venture which is funded and operated through partnership of government and one or more private sector companies, which enables public sector to harness expertise and efficiency that private sector can bring to delivery of certain essential products, facility or services. Now, since I am pharma company man, I am involved in healthcare and I am working with 3 PPP models. And I will talk to you my hands-on experience with 3 PPP models in different countries. Why pharma healthcare needs PPP model? Basically, the price is constantly increasing, changing disease pattern, increasing use of sophisticated technology and diagnosis and treatment. Amongst all, government today rely on private sector for direct healthcare delivery. Now, I will talk to you about some various PPP model. You all know US government has taken initiative to challenge AIDS in Africa and other tier 2 nations who cannot, or resource-setting countries where the poverty is there, people cannot afford, government cannot afford. US government in 2008 declared $48 billion budget for 5 years to challenge the AIDS in Africa, which now they extended again for another 3 or 4 years with similar kind of resources and funds. Now, PEPFAR is President Emergency Funds for AIDS Relief, which initiated, funded by United States government, which helps to save those suffering from HIV/AIDS around the world. A special focus is on improving health for women, newborn children. It is the largest commitment by any nation to combat single disease internationally. Now, how does PEPFAR works? PEPFAR people, US government is very, very influential. They called all originator patented product manufacturers and requested them, they want to have an access program in various countries. But when they give an access program, the challenge is the patented product price they need to protect. So they need to choose some company who could be given voluntary license of their patented product to reach the sufferings. Now with this, they give voluntary license to Indian company, and my company was one of them to procure 3 such licenses. With this, what really happens, the originator company, they give the technology transfer, they hold your hand and give the whole technology to the generic manufacturer. That means our product is absolutely at par with the originator quality, efficacy. Now, US government also influences US FDA to give tentative approval. Tentative approval means this product is approved for marketing and manufacturing and supplies to any country in the world except for USA. We are not allowed to sell in USA till the patent is there. And these companies also give us access to the countries, these access countries of PEPFAR. Now, with this, what really happened, the interesting concept they have developed, they have done a supply chain. The supply chain is all selected by PEPFAR people. They sit in Washington, their whole supply chain is in Washington, but they have spread their depots all over the world, in Africa, some countries in Asia also have PEPFAR now, they are PEPFAR country, so they have their supply chain depots. Now, supply chain depot, they do not work only for the supply chain. They also go and backward to give newer technologies to bring down the cost of the product. They have some experts sitting in a PEPFAR. There are some experts sitting in supply chain management. They go and help to develop the newer technology and low-cost technologies, by which my product continuously to improve in efficacy and also the technology to bring down the cost further, so that funding agencies are able to provide same treatment to larger number of population. So they become knowledge partner also. Then this relation, how it works it. The patent ARVs have become accessible to largest population in the world, large population in the world. My panelists, you will be very happy that triple drug, which was just 4 years back, 2000, was sold for $10,000 per patient per year, is now costing $40 per patient per year. Efavirenz, which was $462 in 2002, is now $36 per patient per year. Now with this, what is happening? There is a goal. There is a goal of 15 by 15, that 15 million HIV positive people should have treatment and get treatment by year 15. Now this number is increasing, ever increasing. Now today, almost 10 million, 9.7 million HIV AIDS positive people, they get treatment world over because of this accessibility. And this accessibility, thanks to Indian generics, they have given this kind of high quality products and become a part of this PPP project of US government. So now with this, what's really happened, this PPP model, generic manufacturers from India and other countries have emerged as the key suppliers in supply chain. Now 48 billion revenue, majority of the revenue is coming to Indian companies. Though margins are less, but we have enhanced our quality, capability, capacity, and also increased our turnover and revenue, and we are part of the system. Generic manufacturers have graded their manufacturing facility, and PEPFAR has created a win-win for funding agencies, ARV manufacturers, thus very ultimately it is benefiting the population. This is the first PPP model. Let me give you Brazil model of PPP. The Brazil also their drugs or medicines are very expensive. So government of Brazil brought a very interesting PPP model. They said there are 3 phases the PPP will work. In the first phase, we'll allow the local company, Brazilian pharma manufacturer, having capability and resources, are allocated list of the products which are important for Brazil to bring under PPP, who are important from the disease point of view, economy point of view, cost point of view. So now with this, Brazil local manufacturers, they get the product from India or some other country. Then their transfer of technology takes place, and after transfer of technology of even third phase is API and intermediates also to be transferred to them. Now with this, within 5 years, the whole technology is transferred to Brazil under this PPP model. In the process, what's happening, the country gets manufacturing technology, product acceptance, enhancement of manufacturing facility, and helps bringing down the cost, and country becomes self-reliant. Third, of course, is path malaria vaccine, which is NIH, Bill Gates, and then my company developing malaria vaccine. So one is knowledge partner, other is a funding partner, third is a development partner. And with this, one malaria vaccine is tried, is developed, commercialized, the beneficiary will be all of us, and more than then, it will be humanity, and more so in Africa and Arizona state on that side. So these are all some, because I have been given time please note here, so I'm not allowed to talk further. So I'm very open and transparent man, so fine. I think there is a section for me to talk, so we'll not just talk more, madam. Just 1 minute to let me conclude this. So, so benefit in PP in healthcare, of course. This is finance of healthcare infrastructure, private capital and expertise, increase access, self-reliant, better adherence to treatment, and these benefits will continue to pass on, and the PPP model works very well. If PPP is designed and delivered effectively in transparent manner, with clear and common objective to succeed, it is a very positive step in developing economies. I recommend more PPP model to come in healthcare, because this will benefit not only the organization, government, but humanity at large. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Khanna, for your world view in regard to PPP model. I now invite Mr. Subramaniam, Chief Risk Officer, Larsen & Toubro. Larsen & Toubro is an organization which you know, arguably perhaps the biggest in India on EPC and activities related to that. They are all over the world, and it would be useful to know their experience in regard to their work in Asia and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair and distinguished fellow panelists and the august audience. It's a great pleasure to be here representing L&T and especially my company L&T IDPL. Now, basically, not many of you would have heard about this company called L&T IDPL. So we have been implementing great number of PPP projects across sectors, and we have had a ringside view of how PPP can deliver and also misfire. And I thought this will be an ideal forum to share how PPP should be taken forward, because a lot of governance people are out here, and I'm sure they'll be able to take a leaf out of what we have been through, both positive and negative. Basically, briefly about us, and then on to the things of the session. Larsen & Toubro is one of the most respected private sector company in this country, started by two Danish engineers, Larsen & Toubro. And now currently, as per the latest audited turnover, it's in excess of $10 billion. And as Mr. Kimji pointed out, we have significant international operation in the Southeast Asian nations, the Gulf country, including Oman, and now we are trying to spread our wings to other countries. we are into hydrocarbons and the power transmission sector significantly in these countries. Now, looking at L&T IDPL, it's a great pride. It's sitting hidden in the balance sheet of L&T. We can proudly claim that we have redefined infrastructure in this country. It started as a single unit or a development projects of the Larsen & Toubro ECC group, and subsequently it's been floated as a holding company for several of the infrastructure projects. Right now we have asset sides of $450 billion in 19 road projects, 3 ports, and the Hyderabad Metro Rail. This is the biggest concession of the metro sector that's there anywhere in the world, and we are currently implementing the same. It's 1.9 billion worth as per the latest exchange rate, and we are of course exploring various opportunities in other sector. Having said that, that's so different about us is that we have been through the entire infrastructure cycle. We have bid for projects, we have implemented them. Some of the projects we have handed over back to the government. So we have the entire perspective of the PPP life cycle, and I'm sure there are a lot of valuable lessons that we can share with the academic and as well as the people who are representing the development aspects of the Asian and African nations out here. So we have been, as I told you, seen the entire cycle. And now let's look at some of the USPs of the corporate sector, which can be leveraged well. I'll go on to illustrate how it has really happened in our case and how things have really worked out well for the government, basically. We are less, of course, corporates are less bureaucratic and more agile. Not to say anything negative about the government. They are handling public money, so they have to be working in a certain way. So this gives us some advantages. We can access and use technologies and properly maintain the things which we have created, the assets we have created. And we use concepts like life cycle costs. Most of the acquisition by public method of procurement is based on the least cost upfront. So they don't have, it's difficult to use such concepts, whereas private sector can use such concept. We are more efficient, less prone to wastage. Of course, there is definitely an economic and financial requirement behind it. We do, of course, ultimately elevate the service levels, and taking off on the Honorable Minister, Mr. Praful Patel, he has spoken something about the airport. I've got a small two quick slides to share with you, talking about the same thing. Ultimately, the whole country or the nation gains. And then going forward from here, how can Asia and Africa leverage this experience? I'll be briefly talking about it at the end of the speech, quickly. Faster and timely delivery of infrastructure. See, basically most of our projects, we are proud to say that have been completed on time, except few things where we had issues. I'll talk about it later. So timely delivery of projects, of course, means that the productivity of capital goes up automatically. There is no doubt about it. And this is going to be a very key and vital thing for delivery of infrastructure, or for that matter, any service. It's very important. We are more responsive to customer demands. You can take the example of the airport privatization and the airline privatization in India. The choice goes up, the service level goes up. We are more efficient in the use of technologies. Just to give you an example, we use better and slender structures, which can lead to lesser consumption of resources, basically. We have used them in projects, and that leads to, better benefits and efficiency in the deployment of capital. And ultimately, this also gives confidence to the government to use such technologies, which can ultimately lead to TFP growth, total factor productivity growth. Now, some of our toll roads, they are all really masterpieces of technologies. We adopt the latest technologies, the automatic traffic counter cum classifier, the CCTVs across the entire reach, emergency call boxes, smart cards. All these things means faster service, quicker response to emergencies, and if you compare it with the traditional way of service delivery by government, it's an order of magnitude improvement. And we have done this in all our projects. Now, we also set benchmarks. L&T is proud to have been associated with the construction of some of the largest airports in this country, and we were also co-developers to the Bangalore airport. Now, what has happened is, this has set benchmarks to the Airport Authority of India, and they have really delivered some of the good airports in this country, including Pune. This is a view of the terminal inside the Chennai airport. Of course, it's really because of the fact that pressure has built up on them from the private sector, which has set very high benchmarks. The public sector is also delivering, significantly an improved level of service. A view from the inside of the domestic terminal and a view from the outside of the domestic terminal. So this is quite a great spin-off, and I'm sure such things will be applicable elsewhere in the world also. Now, sharing of knowledge is something very important. Private sector actively participates, including our company participates with various governments at various levels, at the federal level, at the state level, at the municipal levels, by which projects do get structured well. There are, significant improvements in service deliveries that have been possible. I can share with this audience one of the leading examples where development financial institutions have catalyzed the growth of municipal sector in a state. That was Tamil Nadu. 3 financial institutions, ICICI, IL&FS and HDFC, got together with the government of Tamil Nadu, and they set up an institution called TNU IFSL, which was basically an asset manager. It was not only an asset manager to the fund, but it has also really catalyzed the growth of the municipal sector in that state. Several PPP projects which would have been otherwise unimaginable has been possible to be delivered. One of the example was the Alandur sewerage scheme, where the people of the municipality got together with the private sector to improve and rather implement a sewage scheme. So that was basically structured by this company. And all of us know the success story of the 11th plan, by which about 38% of the total 20,000 billion of investment in infrastructure has come from private capital. Now, CSR is another thing we are seriously into. To share with you a proud thing that our company is doing, we have created an all-women toll plaza in the Pimpalgan-Nashik-Gonde section on the NH3. So that is gender empowerment for us, and we also do other CSR activities in our projects. So, so these are some of the good aspects that I'm sure all of the people, the audience here, the people will be able to implement in PSP when they are designing such PSPs across the nations in Africa and Asia. Now, coming to a note of caution, see, we have seen a lot of things happening in this infrastructure sector. It's been characterized by irrational exuberance, especially in the power and the road sector. Of course, there have been terrible setbacks that have happened in this recent past, which has to be guarded against, of course. Having said that, the government on its part has also had its own share of inability to act on its commitments, because see, the democratic polity in this country imposes a lot of difficulties and problems. Of course, different levels of government have to react. So it's very important that across the world, whenever PSP is implemented in such difficult sectors like roads or ports or railways, it's very important that all the levels of government get together so that the baby which gets delivered is done effectively and it's delivered on time. It's also important that when projects are prepared by the various governments, proper and thorough investigation is done and projects are floated at the true cost. Basically, a lot of projects which have come out to bid show a great difference between the cost that the government estimates versus we estimate. So that gives problems right upfront when we close the funding with the financial institutions. For instance, one set of projects which we have done in a state, the difference between the TPC, total project cost of the government versus us, is about 50%. So we have a terrible challenge when we financially close such projects with financial institutions. So it's very important that projects are prepared properly, and one-sided concessions are, as much as possible, it becomes an even concession. So these lessons, I'm sure, can be applied to other countries, and we are only willing to come and lend you consultancy assistance and such other possible, partnerships which can really make a difference in the proper delivery of infrastructure. Thanks a lot. It's been a great pleasure being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balasubramaniam, about your experiences in capacity building in Asia and Africa. We have a little more time in order for presentation of papers, but I would like to take this opportunity not only to thank our distinguished speakers list, but to mention that this was a panel which has had actually 3 different subjects to deal with: the public-private participation, inclusive growth, and role of the private sector. So obviously, in order to get the benefit of the experiences of all the speakers and the knowledge, we have had to slightly extend this forum, and I believe that as a result of their sharing of experiences with us, we have been enriched by the personal experiences both of the public and the private sector. But before I give the opportunity to our 2 paper presenters, I would like to ask the Honorable Minister for him to make a comment, and he would have to go a little early, so you would kindly excuse us for doing so.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. I just want to make one closing remark, and I would like to say that when we talk of public-private partnerships and global partnerships, Symbiosis itself is a very classic example of what public-private partnership and global partnerships can be. In India, we never had any private education until, say, 20-25 years ago, except some schools run by Jesuits or some, convent schools across the country. But basically, we've always had government education at the highest levels. And today, you see what public-private partnerships has redefined how education is in our country now and forever. So I would say it's a great opportunity for all of us to really experience it right here while we are speaking and while you are listening. So I think it's a great compliment to Symbiosis for having brought in the public-private partnerships and global partnerships. We have distinguished friends here from all over the world, but we have students here who are studying here from all over the world, and that itself is a demonstration of what truly global partnerships will be now and in future. So Symbiosis has shown us the way via this conference, not only to address you in terms of what our perspective is, but from your own learning and from your own work, you have given us a perspective of what public-private and global partnerships can be. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. May I request the panel to please keep seated?
So, Mr. Prakash Shah, His Excellency, may I please request you to felicitate Mr. Praful Patel, the Honorable Minister, before he leaves?
Please do it quickly because he has to catch a flight at 4 o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to what the panel has enlightened us with, we have 2 papers which have been submitted and selected out of the number of papers we have received on this subject. The first paper is by Ms. Anita Medekar, and may I request her to come on the stage and give a very brief presentation of her paper on this subject. Ms. Anita Medekar, please.
Respected Ambassador Shah, distinguished panel members, Chancellor of the University, Vice Chancellor, and all the staff and students of Symbiosis International University. Thank you very much, first of all, for giving me this brief opportunity to speak about my research at your prestigious university. As our distinguished speakers have already established what PPP is all about, and one of our speakers spoke about the pharmaceutical industry in the health sector, as well as PPP in Oman, in the health sector needed, and other areas in Asia and Africa. So that's my layout of the paper. Yes, sure.
Another one of our speakers has to leave. Maybe just give him a token of appreciation.
Yes, sure.
Let her make the presentation. We can do it after 5 minutes, the other one. Please.
Okay, sorry.
Well, the main purpose of this paper, as you can see, is to examine and critique the Indian government policy in the development of medical tourism on one hand, and on the other hand, to explore the PPP with the private corporate sector in provision of healthcare, and especially inclusive development in the provision of healthcare or medical treatment in India. So that's the main focus of my research here. And as you can see, that India in 2009 ranked second after Thailand in medical tourism. In this century, in the 21st century, we have seen that there is increase in trade, healthcare, cross-border healthcare trade from developed countries and developing countries in South Asia, as well as from Africa to countries like India, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, which are the competing partners for India. So India really has to make sure that it keeps its second position after Thailand in medical tourism. Who are the drivers in medical tourism? Since corporatization, deregulation, privatization, globalization, digitization, all these various factors have played a role where now patients or medical tourists are traveling from developed as well as developing countries especially in Asia, for medical treatment. And one of the key drivers beside all these factors is the private sector, the role the private sector hospitals have played in Thailand. Especially it started during the Asian crisis of 1997, where private corporate hospital, Bamrunghad, and other hospitals, Bangkok Hospital, played a key role. And similarly, we see in India, Apollo, Fortis, and all these hospitals, Max India, Sancheti, we see a lot of Omanese patients coming here from Africa and other Asian countries, playing a key role. Apollo also has various branches now in many African countries, in Bangladesh and so on. They're opening a branch in Mauritius also, I heard. So why India, you would wonder? Well, one of the key, after exploring the websites of the corporate private hospitals, as well as the YouTube testimonials by the patients, it was concluded that one of the key reasons is not just the low cost and affordability in terms of surgical costs and for the pharmaceutical costs, but also low or less waiting time. The Joint Commission internationally accredited medical facilities and treatment that is available at the state-of-the-art medical technology and facilities that we have in India, amongst the 17 hospitals which are accredited by JCI. Moreover, there's also the highly qualified professional staff, medical staff, doctors, nurses, and quality of care, including privacy, confidentiality, and not to mention the exotic destination that India offers to the tourists. So we see that besides the 6 S's that we have in tourism, sun, sea, sand, sex, surgery, safari, spirituality, we can add the 7th one, surgery, to this concept. So India, as we know, is the second largest population in the world, with 17% of world population, 35% of the world's poor resides here, 40% of the world's illiteracy rate. So PPP approach for sustainable development of healthcare facilities with the corporate private sector is very essential, as you already know about it, because we can't just depend on the government. So we need to have an inclusive development approach, pro-poor inclusive development approach with equity and which is ethical to involve the rest of the population who do not have access to first world healthcare at third world prices. So in the 11th five-year plan, as you all know, that the pro-poor macroeconomic development policy was adopted in India, and in the 12th five-year plan emphasized towards faster, sustainable and more inclusive growth. And in the Millennium Development Goals, as you know, health is one of the objectives. So the research method, I'll move on, and well, there is, plethora of literature on what is inclusive development, inclusive growth, on public-private partnerships, medical tourism, medical travel, medical refugees. These are the various terms used for cross-border trade in healthcare services. And this cross-border trade in healthcare services under the GATS, General Agreement of Trade in Services, lies in the in the second mode of GATS. Okay, I have to wind up in 2 minutes. Okay, so in 2010, India was declared as a global health destination. One of the objectives was to make it a global health destination. So what were the Indian government policy initiatives? As we have seen, the M-Visa and MX Visa, likewise treating foreign patients is legally an export, so it is eligible for all these fiscal incentives. So government has provided all the fiscal incentives and other incentives to support the private corporate hospitals to provide or treat foreign patients and the Indian rich community. But what is the critique here is that the poor are left out, the disadvantaged. The cost of surgery and medical treatment has gone up. So what can we do, or what can the private corporate sector do to provide inclusive growth, to focus on inclusive growth in terms of corporate social responsibility, and maybe adopt a village, urban poor village or rural area, and include this poor in reaping the benefits. Thank you. Okay, and that's my speech. I have developed a model which you can do, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Medekar, for sharing with us the benefit of your research on the subject. And before I call upon the next presenter and the last paper to be presented here today, let me just point out one small thing. As some of our panelists, and particularly the minister, mentioned, as every country in the developing world became independent, there was a great emphasis on the public sector, and that emphasis on the public sector, or on the government spending the money for giving the benefits to the people, was increasingly shared with the private sector. And in effect, for somebody like me as a layman, what it really meant was that the governments decided that while in the initial stages it's the taxpayers' money which should be utilized for giving the services to the people, it increasingly dawned upon them and the rest that it's also the consumers' money that should go into it. So the taxpayers' money utilized by the public sector and the users' money which the private sector provided would, when put together, will be able to provide a much better basis of economic development in the developing countries. May I now ask Dr. Matthew to present his paper, and he has 5 minutes for that.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and I'm sorry because the time is very less, so I would like to thank Symbiosis University for allowing me to present my paper, which is on Africa 2020, and I'll try to be very short and sweet as much as possible. This is the African business trend for the 2020 in the next 6 years to come. There would be urbanization in Africa, which would be having at least 15% of the urban population, and there would be regional integration, connection, that is communication increase, beneficiation, value-added value-added industries like minerals, Then there would be a renewable energy source that is adding to the smart grid, changing business models where 50% of the households would be from having discretionary income, a responsible agricultural revolution, and future infrastructure. This is from Frost & Sullivan. This is the trend of Africa in the next 6 years to come. As predicted by IMF and economists, there are 6 out of 10 countries that are growing at a very rapid GDP growth rate in the year 2001 to 2010. And by the year 2015, that would include 7 African nations in the top GDP growth rate. Most notable among them is Ethiopia with 8.1%. India and China is on the top. As you see the color red, this has maximum growth rate, the sub-Saharan region, and the colors yellow are the ones that are growing and going to grow rapidly. We are actually looking at a future scenario in the year 2020. And so if you look at what other diversification other than one industry or commodity, we have on the x-axis a need for economic diversification from agriculture to manufacturing to services sector. And if there is an increase, you can see that there would be increase in exports and therefore export and investment in export-related industries, which are on the y-axis. This gives a graph of about 23 economies of Africa, and you can see that we can divide this into 4 regions: pre-transition, transition, diversified, and oil exporters. So it's basically something like a BCG matrix, where we would look at in 2020 countries which move from pre-transition to transition to diversified instead of depending on only oil and one commodity. So the economies which are diversified are South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. 83% of their GDP contribution is from manufacturing and services. And they need now further improvement only in the retailing, banking, and telecom sector, and expansion in food processing and construction industry. Whereas for the oil industries, they need to diversify in order to improve. These are countries like Angola, Algeria, and Libya and Nigeria. In fact, Angola, Algeria, and Nigeria have exported $1 trillion worth of oil up to the year 2008, from 2000 to 2008. Nigeria is promoting the banking and telecom sector, and after this promotion in the year 2000, the telecom industry, the mobile subscribers have increased to 63 million people who are using telecom industry. There's also a need to invest into infrastructure and education. We have the transition economies, which looks at not depending on one commodity, for example, Zambia or aluminium in Mozambique. And we have the pre-transition economies, where we have poor nations like Mali and Ethiopia. They need to develop their law and order situation in order to improve their economy. Finally, I would like to tell about the trade in India, and I would like to mention one point, the second last point on natural resources. Africa has 99% chrome resources of the world, 85% platinum resources of the world, 70% tantalum, 68% cobalt, and 54% gold. This needs to be used and properly utilized in order to have a proper Indo-African business by the year 2020. This is my name.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew, for your presentation today. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we come to the end of our session here. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the speakers on our panel. As you might have noticed, We have the largest number of speakers on one panel, and I thank them very deeply for cooperating with us in finishing the time that was allotted to us in terms of the panel's time limit for our deliberations. And with that, may I bring to an end and once again thank our panelists for their cooperation. Thank you very much.
May I request Ambassador Shah to please felicitate the speakers. I would also like to request Ambassador Devre, the convener of this conference, to felicitate the chairperson. Thank you, everyone.